They say we should have known better than to fall so deep down into this rabbit hole we found. And I was thinking.
Hi, this is Nikolai, and you're listening to My Dad Rafal, co-host James Jardian, and featuring Mr. Jim Tiller on the one and only Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. Plug in, listen up, and enjoy.
Deep into this pool of regrettable situations. Pitch black, think back to the last time that we
were Alrighty, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome down the Security Rabbit Hole, the cybersecurity's longest continuously running podcast, recording 600 and, I don't know, 30 something, 20 something. I've lost track. We have a lot of episodes, James.
I know. And, it's 632, I think, is what you have this one initially at, which is funny. You know, I came on at 33, so
yeah, almost 600 episodes.
Yeah.
And now Jim's going to have to start counting how many episodes in he is, because now he's official.
Yeah, I think I get 631.
So 5, all right.
Yeah, yay.
We'll get to 5, then we'll get to 10, and then let's go. All right.
Party time.
Cast of characters, and I'll introduce everybody, and I'll tell you guys what the show is going to be about. This is highly likely to be a two-parter. I say this because if this fits into a 30-minute conversation, we've done something horribly wrong. And also, we haven't properly addressed the slight drinky, because this is one of those episodes where I figured it would require some lubrication, if you will. So I'm going to go bottom right-hand corner and counterclockwise, starting with my good friend Raja. Welcome back, sir. And I'm sorry you're a Seahawks fan.
I don't have much to say about that.
Quick intro for yourself, sir.
My name is Raja Mukerji. I am the co-founder and chief scientist of ExtraHop. Before ExtraHop, I was one of the chief architects over at F5 Networks. And my mother tells me that I'm a big deal.
You are. Don't kid yourself. All right. Right above him, the one and only reforming Gartner analyst. Hey, Anton.
Hello there. Of course, yes. I have my new T-shirt. Clean T-shirt from
confused.
Yes, exactly.
All right, Mr. Paul Farley, welcome aboard.
Hey, thanks, Rod. Glad to be back.
Good to have you back. All right, so a little background. So for those of you guys that don't listen, Anton and Tim have a cloud security podcast by Google. It's called the Cloud Security Podcast, and they're on episode. It's very aptly named.
Very cleverly named.
By Google, too. By Google.
They dispensed with the cleverness and went straight for utility. I love it, because that's what we try to do here sometimes. They're episode 202. You know, sometimes I listen to like podcasts while I drive or while I work out or other things. This one I was listening to on the way back from the airport on a day trip this past Monday. And it is called episode 202, Beyond Tiered SOCs, SOCS, Detection as Code and the Rise of Response Engineering. And while I was listening, I think the amount of curse words per mile dramatically increased as I was yelling at my car the time, because good content, by the way, Anton. Way to steer the conversation. I think it was really good. Well, but like
The bot's kind of
so interesting of a conversation. So here's where I want to start, and this is a cast of characters that should be able to really bring this home. Let's start with this premise: the SOC needs to evolve in some way. We've had Eric Block on here who told us that the SOC is effectively, remember Anton, this conversation, that is the SOC was effectively kind of help desk for security stuff, right? And they kind of manages, it works tickets. It's not really the cool thing we all think of, right? When you think of like bad guys being tracked down by good guys and, you know, this constant war back and forth. So if the SOC needs to evolve, what parts of it are we thinking need to evolve the most and why? And I'm just going to like pull that pin and just chuck it there in the middle, and somebody catch that.
And you also want to have me be last, I would assume, right? Otherwise, I'll start talking for an hour and we're done.
You can be first, but I'm happy to.
No, I'll be last.
I can mute you. I have the power of mute. If you're not watching the video, you're missing Anton's antics, and this is great. This is one of the greatest reasons to have video. All right, who wants to jump on this? Come on, guys.
I'll get in there. I think
right,
there's
Farley.
a lot of things to fix, right? There's some stuff that was called out. We have to make it easier for the entry level people. Most companies start this journey with relatively junior people or senior people that were an architect or in another role. And so I think the expectation that somebody's going to jump in and immediately level up and be a super elite detection engineer, incident responder, whatever. I mean, this is a discipline. We have a talent pipeline problem, which I think we have to address both with how we move people through, but as well, I think that first step, I agree with the podcast. I don't want to beat on Anton's podcast the whole time, but I like the fact that I think we can make step one easier with technology, right? I think we should. I don't think it scales, but the way a lot of people have been addressing it. But I think this is both a talent pipeline, like how do you bring people up and through, as well as the technology, right? If it's going to be, as you said, Raf, a help desk, then it should need a help desk type persona and experience to run it, not somebody who's studied for years and years and then can never escape it because nobody else wants to get into it.
I agree with that, Paul. One thing I would add, though, is I think that fundamentally one of the problems with SOCs today are the metrics are all wrong. I mean, if we take a look at things like the number of tickets closed and the volume and what have you, the success, the measurements that we're using to assess the efficacy of a SOC are primarily volume driven rather than effectiveness driven. And I know it's tricky to talk about effectiveness, but I think if the SOC is treated as a, shall we say, a nexus of information, a place where people, security professionals and people in the organization can share information collaboratively to kick off investigations and actually resolve issues, I think it's going to be far more effective than this race to the bottom that we have right now of people just going and hammering tickets day after day.
But I think one of the interesting points that was made was whatever the next iteration of this department is, it shouldn't be measured by it really shouldn't be like closing. The goal shouldn't be closing tickets, right? Anton, is my category characterizing that correctly? Because that's not what that's about. If you're playing defense, like closing tickets feels at best a pretty far tangent.
That's all very fair. I mean, there's nothing. Yeah, sorry. Is it my turn already or not yet?
Go ahead.
Because I think that you're competing for the depressing take of the day on SOC, and I think that this is kind of you're winning the depressing take. But I kind of have the pendulum, and I'm going to just swing it to the opposite direction, and then they'll have to go find the middle, because the opposite direction is. People have studied that SOCs can sometimes have knock DNA or help desk DNA, and people have looked at this and thought SOC with knock DNA or SOC with help desk DNA needs to die, and they have killed it, and it was gone. It was completely destroyed, burned to the ground, and then something else was engineered, literally the word, to resemble an engineering team that happens to do security. The challenge with that, of course, is that it can be done by roughly nobody. And it has been done by somebody who are super happy with the results. The problem is that create a portable baby version of that approach is very difficult. Because when I came here, I got in the same trap of why is there no SOC? And of course, the answer is very clear, because there's no SOC here, because the letter O is wrong. It's operations. There's no SOC here that operates as an operations team. And because everything is E, kind of like SREs aren't sysadmins. Again, I can ramble about this for hours, but the problem is when I struggle with, okay, you did Google. Well, not I did. Google did Google. Now you do Bank of Kansas. And everybody's like, maybe try this. And people are like, we're going to try this. Yeah, not so much the scale, but the depth of redoing. It is kind of like grown from a different DNA. It's not, it has no SOG DNA in it. It's no NOG DNA in it. It has no help desk DNA in it. But making it portable is hard. I tried once. I wrote this blog called Baby ASO, a minimal viable transformation. It's a kind of a miserable attempt to create a non-transformative transformation. But guess what? It's not going to work, because the answer is kind of philosophically known. I just don't know how to have it happen elsewhere.
Some of the problem, though, is the fact that like some of the organizations are so different. You talk about like a Google, you talk about a Microsoft, right? Everything's engineering. But you talk about a Bank of Kansas, that's not engineering, right? Like they have operations teams, they have all that stuff. They treat it very differently. So how do you take that difference and say, does a SOC work in the traditional sense for those type of places versus when you're talking about, hey, we're a very engineer heavy place. Yeah, SOC doesn't make sense, right? Maybe some of that functionality rolls into the NOC or it rolls into the help desk, but what we would consider that is an engineering feature. And we're taking it levels beyond what an organization that doesn't have that engineering capability in-house.
Right.
Jim, I'm going to throw this to you because we've been in this situation before. This feels like, and Anton's talking about tearing down and burning down the SOC. I think that in my days on the enterprise side, security took away management and maintenance of all the security devices because they were somehow special. Particularly the network stuff, right? The network devices. And then quickly realized they're just network devices that we just need to manage a policy on, that like there's no reason for this. And then more things started moving into that bucket that were software related. So maybe I don't want to completely burn down the SOC, because there is a part of security operations, the business of operating the security organization. That is, there are tickets in there, things like updating my identity if you own IDM, doing various configuration things, new installation, whatever. But then there's the job of hunting and identifying things that shouldn't be there. And my premise and the thing I would put forth is maybe that's a new department.
What 100%. So I was going to bring up earlier is I think the concept of the SOC, and we're trying to say, like, is it DNA from the NOC? Yeah, a little bit of help desk. The problem is the SOC was always there to kind of, as like an adjunct to IT. And I vividly remember in the early days, like back in IPsec days, we're like, oh, VPNs is security. I'm like, no. We're not going to think twice about VPNs and security ever again after 2000 kind of thing, right? And it's just kind of evolved. And then it was like, well, we need something to do identity management and firewall rule sets and yada, yada, yada. And a lot of that stuff has veered off into a direction where now we in the security industry say SOC when we actually mean detection and responding and dealing with types of threats. So threat intelligence, understanding how to properly detect different scenarios, learning what the attacks are, doing intelligence, translating that to a mechanism where we can look to identify them in a nonlinear way in a perfect world, going back to the podcast kind of thing. We just need to stop with the whole SOC thing altogether and recognize that the fundamentals of operating security, making things happen in a security space, is a very different animal than protecting an organization. And then once you make that delineation, once you make that delineation, we kind of come back to a little bit of James's point, if you will. It's like, okay, now what does that look like, right? What is that kind of, how do we begin to approach it in that sense? And that's when we run into the problem of a bank versus Google, right?
Mhm.
Technology company, managed services, whatever, IT company versus a company that, lends money
Healthcare.
or builds buildings and stuff like that. How they measure security is volumetric, to Roger's point. So then you need, well, you're not doing something. So if I have more tickets, then I can justify my
Mhm.
existence. So we're sort of sucked back into the vortex of being a SOC. So we can have a lot of tickets like a knock or a help desk, but in fact, that's not at all what we need to be doing.
Well, and there's a lot of
Hmm.
places, right? Like boards are looking for that type of info. Execs are looking for that type of info. They understand SOC, so they're looking for those type of even though we can sit here and say those metrics are useless, that's what people are looking for is those metrics. Like, oh my gosh, I blocked 1 billion requests to my
That's right.
my systems. And it's like, that's great. It's a bunch of Akinetic scans doing jack squat out there, right? But it doesn't mean anything, but the numbers look good. And, this isn't a security issue for the Googles and the Netflix and the Microsofts versus the worlds, right? We see this with everything. Look at people out there like, oh, I'm going to architect my tiny 200 person, 5,000 client business with microservice and all that because Netflix says it works for them, right? And then they over architect, but it doesn't work for you. And I think that's where we see that big challenge.
That's exactly right. Look, what we call the SOC these days is less about security and more about compliance. That's what we're really trying to measure. When we look at the number of things that are blocked, we're trying to take a look at the known CVEs. We're not actually looking for those nation state attackers or those APTs or people who have any sort of sophistication. We're looking for the script kiddies who are running, Metasploit on us or Bloodhound or that lowest common denominator. And that's the issue. It's actually almost a false sense of security because we sit around and say, okay, yeah, we blocked the following tickets. That's great to convince your QSA that you're doing your job. But if the mission is to not convince somebody you're doing your job, then we're looking at something that's a bit more akin to, I don't know, a fusion center or something where they're gathering multiple threat intelligence or something that interfaces with an FS ISAC or more information sharing than the operational closed ticket after ticket.
So, Anton, I muted you because apparently you're writing your next blog as we were going, so the typing was getting out of control. But so if we can agree that I think what's happening is there are 3 parts of a security organization emerging. There's one that's actually doing the working inside the business to help it design and architect its business practices and products in a secure fashion, right? So you're working with the products team, you're making sure the new project that's coming up doesn't call for an FTP transfer across unsecured internet, right? And you're not, that kind of thing. Part 2 is what we've, I guess we'll say, classically referred to as SOC, which is the business of operating security as a function, which should be very, very small, right? Making sure that the compliance boxes are checked properly, that everything's functioning, that things are working, that policies being implemented that we've set, Then there's the new thing we're talking about. And maybe it's, I liked CDC, Cyber Defense Center. That was kind of cool. But I don't know if it really helps to invent new terms in a world that already thinks we do too much of our own language. But I digress. So whatever this new security function is the business of defending the business, the Department of Defense. No, wait, that already exists. DVD, the Department of Business Defense. I don't know, whatever. But does that make sense, you guys? Like splitting those 3 things up? And I think the 2 pieces that should be fairly significant are the part of the group that's helping the business actually be more secure from the start. That's proportional to how much business you're doing. The part that should be small is the compliancy part, right? The thing that's making sure that policies are followed and boxes are appropriately checked and T's dotted, I's crossed. And then the piece that I think we don't quite know the right scale for is the detection and response to badness, because your guest was right, that doesn't scale linearly. You don't say I've got 10 analysts for 1,000 servers, I add another 1,000, I need 10 more analysts. It can't work that way. We've already run out of those. So one, what is that? Like, how do we structure that new function? I think that's the thing we should solve. And let's be practical about it. And I'm going to tell you, this is definitely going to be a two-parter. So we're at the 20-minute mark. Let's give this a light touch. We'll take a break and then we'll come back and solve it. That's how we do things. So let me ask.
I'm going to get in here, Rob. Go. I'm chomping at the bit. So the previous organization I built, I was keen on not saying CDC because when you use the acronym, it's meaningless. But we called it the Cyber Defense Center specifically to avoid the SOC, because when I counted, there were like 5 different organizations using the SOC acronym, and most of them weren't involved with security, like System Operations Center, or, like it's all over the place, and it quickly becomes meaningless. So we can argue about terminology, and that's not particularly interesting, I don't think. But I can talk about what got us there and then where it broke. And what got us there was really the business problem that, James, I think you started to touch on, or Jim, where you said, look, this is what the business people are asking for. And so when you line up with, hey, what metrics are you producing, or how can you show me what you're doing? You have to convince people that moving to a proactive stance is better, which is really what we're talking about, rather than just being reactive and waiting for the blinky lights to go off. But you still have to be reactive and wait for the blinky lights to go off until you get things automated. And, most organizations can't cross that Rubicon of getting to the fully automated, right? If a playbook is on paper, it's not a playbook. Playbooks can't be on paper. Right. But a lot of places, an alert goes off and they go, let me pull up this Word document. Step 1, that's not a playbook. That doesn't count. And so I think back pressure against what all of us, I think, are trying to argue towards is a lot of times the security organization is pushed under the IT organization. And IT is deep in this thought process. In fact, I even see a lot of organizations, I felt this pressure previously, to bring IT incident management, security incident management, product incident management, all into the same place, because the same skills of being an incident commander, having a scribe, the discipline, the being a professional incident handler is like another layer. So now you have yet another layer of, when things really go boom, not the day-to-day, is that in one place, and what do you call that?
That's a good question. Anybody
Probably needs to be a blog.
Try to take that?
Needs to be a blog, because I think, or maybe a presentation at a conference.
For sure, a PowerPoint.
Yeah, maybe Google Slides, but okay.
Knew that was coming.
Paul,
Plug.
the point is interesting that because of the history of being tied to IT, right? The SOC, by that legacy, is been constrained with a linear function, a ticketing process, a start here, then do this, then it's done, go back to the next one. Where in reality, I think most of the folks that operate in a kind of a detection and response scenario, they don't operate linearly in processes. There are loops, there are some linear things, there are parallel things, right? You identify something that's interesting, then you go gather some more data over here, you bring it in this, you add another step, and while you're doing that, you go run another search over here, and then merge those two together, and then you go, crap, no, that doesn't make any sense. You throw that away and you start over, and then you try something different. And I think it's kind of endemic to this conversation that we want to think of detection and response as a end step process that is linear in nature, that you identify something, you gather the data, you identify remediation, you execute the remediation's done, next step, or next loop, right? Next issue. And that just, that is good, I think, and that may good is maybe stretching, but I think that may have worked in the way that we thought about things previously, because we had the sim and that told us to do it that way. We had our swords and they kind of, nudged us in that direction. But now we're relying a lot more, because we've realized that the human can do probably the majority of this work the best. And we're trying to figure out a way to automate and free them from the shackles of the legacy stuff that we've had behind them. And I think this is where, and Raja, hold on, I got something for you. And I think that this is where we we need something next. But we are at that 25 and a half minute mark. So I'm going to take a slight break. Hold your thought. And we're going to come back and we're going to solve this. Here we go. Okay. Long enough break. Raja. Now, so we're going to come back. So the question I posed was like, what's the thing? And you're dying to say something. So hit me with it.
Chomping at the bit on this one. So look, the NOC, almost every single run center in every enterprise is basically built on these ITIL V2, V3 systems, the orange books and what have you. These are antiquated systems that were intended to run like government organizations with very static environments. They simply cannot work in today's environments. And what's more, that's not a question of philosophy or opinion. Take a look at the NYDFS, the disclosure rules that you have right now around breach mitigation. Apparently, the way this works is that if there's a suspected breach, you've got like 2 or 3 days to announce exactly what that breach was. The materiality, by the way, completely subjective. So now you're a security professional and your SOC is supposed to make this choice between availability and security. I'm sorry, but what the fudging fudge? That makes no sense whatsoever, where you have this group that is built out of ITIL and ITIL v3 and runs those runbooks and runs those playbooks. That is now that step one is if they think they've gotten breached, they shut down everything. It is completely incompatible with the SOC playbooks of today.
Well, I guess it depends how they're written per company, right? But it's also not something that they need to decide without a playbook. If there's a playbook, if type X happens, burn Y to the ground, if it says so, they would do it. Like, I think it's a little bit more about like what's written in the playbooks.
Anton, I think you like burning things a little too much.
I think you're right. Maybe I'm in that mood, but ultimately it's very interesting that we've noticed that in cybersecurity, no problem ever gets solved, right? I mean, you probably heard me joke about how the theft of typewriter ribbons for data theft by stealing a typewriter ribbon is solved, but then somebody else showed up and said, no, we had this case, whatever. The point is that nothing ever gets solved. So I think the only thing that gets solved is when you destroy everything and rebuild it from chips or from IT up. So
I think I still go back is, can we just put to bed that we're not talking about a SOC anymore? Let's just go ahead and agree here, right now, that the SOC is that, and it still has some value. Like, I could argue some of the most boring things you have to do every day. I mean, Roger, you hit the nail on the head when you say compliance. I mean, I was like over here in the corner, like applauding, because sometimes you need that rhythm of like, okay, check the firewall logs, do this, verify that, review this, super boring stuff that is supposed to maintain some contextuality to your environment to ensure you're aligned with the risk and compliance, right? We get that. Super boring, but it has to be done. That's where the real hard work is done. And then on the other side of the coin is this entire threat hunting, investigation, detection, mitigation, and things of this nature. You can go help identify and deal with vulnerabilities. You can help with ID in here. You can do your firewalls and routers and your VPNs and your remote access and yada, yada, yada. There's a whole other thing over here. I say we just stop trying to find a way to fit them back together. I think we're at a point now we need to completely recognize these are two different things. Just call it is what it is, and just say it's got to be something different.
Well, that's what security does, Jim. Security bundles, like, they take everything all into one. The SOC is doing the same thing. It's a black hole of, if it's security, it belongs here. And we had a podcast talking about that, right? Where the SOC was the PBX of the entire business. Anything security related comes in, and they're kind of funneling it out to these different spots, being able to say, listen, threat hunting doesn't belong in the SOC. This doesn't belong in the SOC. put those in different spots, but
Are
so
you
many
saying-
places we see where it
Are
absorbs
you
everything.
saying you don't like the security bundle Ruski?
That is
All right, Paul.
correct.
I think it depends on how you're looking at this, because I agree. Like calling it the SOC is not useful, and that's part of why I argued against it. But part of the reason why we created a cyber defense center and rethought was we weren't doing a great job at detection and response. And part of that was there were 4 different teams involved in vulnerability management, right? There's the people that
Just
do the
4? What happened to the rest of them?
Yeah, I know, right? And so there was like an external team scanning, an external remediation team, an internal and so when you say, hey, do we have this, which I would argue is the new fire drill. It's not somebody's inside the wire. It's new 0 day. Are we affected with this? Where and how do we know we've touched everywhere, including product and third-party managed stuff? And so, when you get into this, you still need folks doing the more routine stuff. And the only way you scale is to have more senior people going after the harder problems. But some of this is our thinking, right? Like hunter killer teams, like taking a group and saying, go find, James, the weird thing, like hey, this doesn't look right, and dig in on that. You find a problem, send all the alerts to you, you run it to ground until it's something that could be maintained by a certain level, mid-level, beginner level, whatever is defined. Then you hand it off and you go to solve the next thing. The problem I've seen with pulling that completely apart is when something really goes boom. If I'm the senior resource, well, I think I define James, so I'll keep James as senior resource. I'll be the junior resource, right? So James is the hot shot, right? If he's the hot shot, as soon as I catch a live one on an alert that I'm like, oh, I think this is real, I'm dragging him in with me. So I can't put too much distance there, or I'm gonna impact my ability to respond. I'm gonna put barriers to communication, whether I mean to or not. So I have to keep connectivity there. They don't have to be in the same manager or whatever, but I have to keep connectivity there, and that has to be fluid back and forth.
Well, I think, to that same point, Paul, I think, having that connectivity, because if you have complete separation, if we go back to the metrics discussion, right? What's my metrics for a hunter killer team? I spent how much time digging into something and went nowhere? Right? What's that look like? I'm passing up like, hey, here's my month. I chased down 50 things and none of them led anywhere. I can't account for really my time, right? Like that, tying it back over into something else, I think helps
James,
justify.
I think that's why that hasn't happened yet, because security teams have been focused largely on, and I think this is the reaction to the overbuying of technology and overbuilding of all the things that security's done. It was like, hey, we need to buy this, otherwise we're going to get hacked. Hey, we need to buy this other thing, otherwise we're going to get hacked. And these 9 other things. And so now it's like, all right, hold on. You got all the stuff. Talk to me about metrics and how do I know when I need to hire another person, and how do I know how effective this team is? And that comes down to how many tickets did you work? That's how help desk works. Right. That's how the knock works. So we jammed security into that problem. And now you're saying, well, hold on. And to Paul's point, I 100% agree with you, Paul. You need that hunter killer team out there, but it's super. I mean, you did this. You got to go to the people that are authorizing you to hire and spend company money and saying, all right, here's what I need. Okay. I need like 2 or 3 super intelligent people, which means they're going to be super smart. I need them to be free range to identify things that may or may not be there. And in the scope of a week, they are going to be able to do some stuff and maybe find some stuff, or maybe nothing. How's that?
Okay, so let me come back at you. So I don't metrics those people, and if you do, you're going to fail. These are the people you hide in the back room. You don't let people see them. But Raph, the way you defend that is the first time something big goes boom, the very first time, everybody is going to look at that person and say, I want that person on the bridge. That person's going to join the bridge. Your leader is going to go, holy shit, she knows what she's talking about. You just keep her. And you're like, every personnel discussion after that, her name will come up and they'll be like, hey, don't worry about it. Don't talk about her. I know she's awesome. Next person. Like, you will never have to ever discuss that again because they will show their value the very first time.
Okay. So look, I like to make some of this stuff practical. Because at the end of the day, I think part of this show is really making this real and practical for people. Because philosophical discussions we'll leave to Anton, because he's some part of his analyst brain can't go away for permanently.
Correct.
Right. So let's do this, Anton. I'm going to start with you on it because you've been the most quiet recently, which is unlike you. So I feel like I have to let you talk, otherwise you might actually stop existing. Where do we start to make this practical for an organization? And I'm not saying an organization that starts to exist tomorrow. I'm saying give me a Fortune 1000 mid-market hospital network that is like, I like this idea. Okay, Anton, now what?
So I can easily explain why I was quiet. I felt like discussion actually went too philosophical, and I also wanted to shape it back to something structured that people can use. So thank you for switching it to practical dimensions. Very quickly, I still feel like one thing that we went kind of off the rails, I feel like, was that we assumed that SOC is either everything operational or DNR or this or that. So I kind of felt like this was a bit of a mistake, because the original podcast, the podcast that started this podcast, mostly assumed that SOC is DNR, detection and response. It did not really talk about password changes and how to automate them or other things. And I think, Eric, in your previous podcast kind of mentioned a lot of this. If it's leftovers, it goes to SOC. Actually, no. In this context, SOC was just DNR. Was maybe hunting, maybe somewhat intelligence, but ultimately DNR, not password resets. So I'll just stick to that definition in my response.
Okay, go ahead.
Because I don't know how to optimize password resets in your, novel netware that you still use to control access to mainframes. I have absolutely no idea how any of this works, because I was not born in the 80s. Actually, wait, I was, but sorry. Apart from that, I think that the small, mid-sized, largish org and modernizing SOC is a really tough one. I'll just give you that. So let's have like a moment of silence about this. There's no quick magical follow this blueprint and you're done. I feel like there is a way to push more and extract threads of DNA from quote unquote Google approach to it, or more engineering-led approach to it, or Netflix SOCless, and implant those threads of DNA into your SOC DNA. And some of the threads probably would use tools like SOAR, automation, how it applies, how the automation backlog handled. A little bit of detection of code DNA, where you would no longer have, who wrote this rule? Dude, you wrote this rule. I don't remember. How about this guy? Has he written this rule? No. A consultant wrote it 2 years ago. So that this is all gone, you can start fixing it. So I think the detection as code, pieces of detection as code help. SOAR, automation, playbooks implanted in this definitely help. There are a few more buckets where you sort of make people into like a analyst but part-time engineers. They're all usable. The problem is that if you implant select engineering-led DNA into a classic SOC, you would have gradual impact. You would not have magical transformation. And that's probably okay. You will be moving in the right direction, just not at the speed of orgs who truly build it from the ground. Again, here's the depressing take to finish on the depressing take. The classic Netflix post about SOCless, which described a similar model, was written in 2018. This is 6 years have passed. And that approach remains cool, esoteric thing that some people do after 6 years.
Yep.
6 years of quote unquote progress led to 0.01% idea became adopted by 0.015% of companies. So 50% growth. but it has not made an impact on a wider scale. So I think to me, think about like implanting threads of DNA into your SOC and seeing what grows. That's my answer.
My spicy take on this is I disagree. I think
okay.
I think if we keep doing that, Anton, in another 6 years, we'll do this again and we'll have 0.019. I think somebody needs to drop the grenade, pull the pin, or pull the pin, drop the grenade. Probably better in that order. Yeah. So, Raja, thoughts on this?
Well, you know me. I've got many thoughts loosely held. So look, I think practically speaking, there's 3 paths we can go down. At least 3 paths that are immediately actionable. Number 1, I mean, there's the MSSPs. I'll be blunt. I'm a little jaded on MSSPs because the entire business model is a race to the bottom, and it's a margins-based business. So very frankly, these MSSPs are incentivized to find people for as low a cost as possible, and by the time they're ramped up, they'll generally go off and they'll join other companies. And look, that's no knock on MSSPs. It's literally a business model hole. The other aspect to that, though, is if you go past the MSSP, do past the bare minimum, now you start looking at people who start customizing your source. But the problem is very often that if you have people customizing your source, you run into that same human capital issue as well, where basically your SOAR and your playbook, they are limited by the amount of people that you can put on maintaining this thing on an ongoing basis. So you do need those processes, and you do need that discipline, that security culture and that discipline first. And I don't want to underestimate or understate how difficult that is to institute in an organization. That's a thing. So now we come to this third area that's an emerging market. And I want to be clear here. I have a conflict over here because I'm actually an investor in one of these companies. I'll do us the favor of not shilling the company, but give me a shout if you want to know who it is. And there are companies that right now are using AI, generative AI, to actually understand, make sense of the alerts that are coming in, and orchestrate a runbook and a SOAR and responses to these things. I think that's the best of all worlds. I think that those have a path in the MSSP. I think they make your internal engineers more efficient too. And ultimately, let's be blunt here, if we're gathering multiple data sources and we're driving coordination between multiple tools and departments inside a company, that's the number one reason companies get breached in the first place. So I think there are definitely green shoots around using AI-assisted SOC assistance.
Okay, I need to say something, and then I want to throw it to Jim because I know he's got something to say. But since you broke the seal on AI, Raja, I drank as we stipulated, and I think the other end where this can help, and there's a company that I'm not an investor of, but I think they've got something good going, is on working with employees. So if you've worked at a large organization, a disproportionate amount of your time is spent chasing people around to find out, is something real? Did they fix it? Or then coming back to you asking questions. I mean, it's a huge time sink, mostly done in email, and it sucks people away from doing more interesting things. And that's an area that I think AI can have a lot of impact. If I can have an AI that reaches out to Anton and says, hey, Anton, are you traveling in this location? Was this you? And then Anton can interact with it and within parameters, clear that, then I don't have to tie somebody up to remember to email, to use the right template, to all the things that you have to do. That's like the easy button to take workload off people's plate.
Can that AI reach out to Anton's AI persona and his AI can respond for him?
I think it's only February. I think it's coming in February. I don't think now is December, so not yet.
Not yet? Okay. But we get to that point, right? I mean, that we're seeing that with AI, the capability, like everybody gets their own AI persona. Like I don't have to interact. Our two AIs can talk about it. Let me get back to doing the work that I'm trying to do.
I just got to say with Raja, and I think that I don't know if I'm a believer in AI. I think I'm having a bit of an internal battle with that kind of stuff. But I do believe there's a lot to be had in advancing security with AI somehow. So when you said things like, SOAR, AI, mixing those two things together, it in some ways, it seems like the natural progression of use of the technology. And we can insert any other word with SOAR, just something that helps us bring more diversity into the information that we're getting, because we're always trying to enrich data. We've been trying to do that forever. And then now we have nothing but data. We're drowning in data and starving for information. So I think the part is what I want to be really careful of is I want us to recognize that we've added so much to the load on the shoulder of security people out there, network people, anybody who attempts to do security, hundreds of certifications, and what am I going to be when I grow up in this security thing? And I think, Paul, you kind of tapped into that a little bit when you talk about using the SOC as almost like an evolutionary point for people's development, which I'm a fan of. But I think we have to find a way to embrace people and their unique skills, because the person who knows how to hunt really well is not the person that's really good at doing an assessment or not good at doing vulnerabilities, because one, you're going to lose them, and two, that's just not what makes them tick. So I think let's focus on things that kind of help us optimize people and not necessarily just optimizing the technology. So for example, and I think I'm trying to remember who said it earlier, but I think it might have been you, Paul, talking about, I don't necessarily want to separate these groups. I want to be able to bring them together when the proverbial poo hits the fan. 100% agree, but not everybody's available. It becomes kind of a clumsy. And the next thing you know, you're dealing with this sort of, how do I orchestrate this mosh pit of people trying to help out in different ways? I think that's a great opportunity for AI or a tool or something to pop in there. But all I know is, for me, SOC is just, I'm just almost tired of talking it in the same language. I'm really, really desperate to move on to the next thing badly. I really want to move out of this sort of center point that we're stuck in.
I would like to point out that as a group, we may have broken a world record for podcasts on the topic by going almost 40 minutes, at least 40 minutes without mentioning AI. So
almost.
So
Sorry,
we tried, but that's pretty good. Jim, I sympathize with you. Paul, I want to go back to what you were talking about having that person or that few people that are sort of like the ninjas of the organization. You kind of keep them away from everybody else, let them do their thing, and you kind of hide them away. Practically speaking, how much of your, and you don't have to disclose anything secret, but how much of your budget for personnel is it fair to say that you could kind of do that with? Is it a number? Is it like a number of people? Is it a dollar?
I don't know what the answer to that question is. I can tell you what my very first mentor told me in my first management job. They said, identify like the 2 or 3 key people that do everything and protect them, and don't let anybody near them, and they will handle the rest. And so it's kind of the same principle in this area. And I'm not saying your whole team. My last org, I had 90 people in my organization. So, those numbers didn't scale. But in the detect and respond area, right, which I agree with your stipulation, Anton, about the SOC, that in the detect and respond area, if you can find a few people that you give them run of the house to go find the stuff that I don't even know I should be thinking about this, and then you're empowered to take it all the way from, okay, now I know how to find it, to automating it to be able to hand it off, right? And in the podcast Anton had, it was detection and response engineering. I think that's pretty accurate. Like, don't stop at throwing it over the wall to a junior person that just got there. What are they going to do with it? That's going to bounce right back. Empower that person, go solve the problem, and then keep all the administrative, keep the compliance stuff away from them, keep all the noise, take their security awareness test if you have to. I don't give a crap. Just keep everything away from them and let them go.
I like that. All right, so let's just we got 5 minutes.
5 minutes.
5 minutes. So let's go around. We've got 5 people excluding me, because you guys don't. You've heard enough of me. We got 5 of you guys. Everybody, take a minute and give me the practical takeaway for somebody listening to this that wants to go improve, that wants to go and implement some of these ideas, but doesn't quite know what to do next. Anton, you go first.
Okay, so I would that basically be kind of easy and cheap, and I would, because the baby A sublog was exactly an answer to this question. How do you sort of transform without truly redoing everything? So I'll just give a post title, and it has a table of 6 steps you can do. They do follow in the same thread of like implant engineering-led DNA in your classic org and hoping for the best. They all fit into this, and the blog is called Baby A, so a minimal viable transformation for your SOC. My answer would just be that.
All right. I think that's the first time you've given me an answer under 60 seconds. Well done. Raja.
Yeah, I think the first and foremost, is to actually is to distinguish between the NOC and the SOC. I think everybody keeps on trying to build a SOC based on NOC DNA. And the longer we do that, the longer this problem is going to go unsolved. And so the metrics that the NOC uses, they have nothing to do with what we try to do with the SOC. I think the goal over here is to create the SOC as an information sharing hub inside the organization, with the metrics or the actual actions being the triggered investigations, the responses being the actual metric upon which we measure it, rather than CVs blocked or holes patched.
Okay. Jim?
I'm going to lean in Paul's direction on this one. I think, especially for small companies or medium-sized organizations where you might already have an operations or SOC or whatever we want to call it that's trying to do everything, is I would lean on people who show interest or bright or already focused in that ability to start detecting, detection engineering or searching or hunting, however we want to phraseology it. But I think the first order of business is get better at building more interesting ways of potentially detecting threats, and that'll lean you more into that sort of non-traditional, what I would consider traditional SOC, and getting more into, we'll just call it the future SOC, whatever we want to call that, and moving forward.
I like it. Paul, I'm going to give you the last word, which means, James, you go next.
So, I mean, for me, I would say, taking stock at what your current SOC is doing. What are your expectations for what that SOC is doing? Where are the gaps for that? And really laying out, okay, here's what we have, here's where we want to go. Now let's start identifying some of the key things where we can start making that progress. I mean, I think like Anton said, right, like threading it in, although Raf disagree with that, it's not the fastest solution to get things going, but few places are going to be able to drop everything they have to zero to start back from scratch, right? Like you have to start figuring out how to weave it in, but it starts with understanding what you currently have and then seeing where do we really want to go with this.
All right, Paul, final word.
Take heart. This isn't an easy problem, right? You've got a lot of experience on this podcast right now, and nobody said, wait a minute, you're all missing it. Here's the answer. So you're no different. Why should you be special? So I would say practically find a few key people who are your top flyers, get everything off their back so they can go chase stuff and help you level up. Part of getting stuff off their back, also look at the other side of the routine stuff that's hitting you. Some folks in the market that are doing something interesting, amplifier security. There's others that are using AI to do all that management out to your employee workforce, right? To offload kind of on the back end, the non-value add stuff of those interactions. And because you have to work both sides of this problem in order to be proactive. At the end of the day, my position is you have to be proactive and go after it and be asking, what am I not seeing? What should I be seeing? Why is that there? That shouldn't be that color, that number, that whatever. You have to be asking those questions. You cannot wait for it to come to you or you're in deep trouble already.
I love it. That's a great place to end it. You guys, this has been awesome. I love these types of things. We get as much knowledge as I can squeeze into these boxes, and then just give you guys the opportunity to throw ideas out. I think for me, the challenge throughout this industry and throughout the time I've spent in it has been, if we try to move things along at a evolutionary pace, it turns into like glacial, and it's been hurting us. I think we're at a point where it's okay to pull the pin, drop the grenade, and say, you know what, we need something new. This is the time for it. And so as Blanton's, huh, Paul? That's good stuff there.
Just
I like it.
cracking out the good stuff from my
Yeah,
friend.
man. I like it. So on that, I think we may have another take on this in a couple of weeks, and maybe after the new year, once we've had some time to think about it. But if you listen to this, you found something that you agree with, something you disagree with, or you've got some knowledge to share, feel free to catch one of us and do that. Share it in the LinkedIn group that we have for the Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. On X, if you're on there, wherever you find yourself these days, you can actually send James and I and Jim a direct message off of your podcast app. That's been kind of a fun feature. Hello to those of you guys that have tried that. I see you. And yeah, I think that's a good place. I think I feel good about what we went, kind of the progression we went through, and we didn't leave it open-ended. We didn't just kind of, crap on somebody else's work. We proposed some solutions. I'm happy with this, and I think we want to keep talking about it. I appreciate you guys joining this show. If you like this content, hey, go find a friend and share this with them. Maybe they'll be in a position to use some of this, because while this is just 6 guys hanging out and chatting, it might actually be useful to somebody. So on that note, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. We'll catch you guys another time and another place on another Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. Ciao.